Schluss ist.
Thank you very much. Thursday at noon is the deadline for amendments. So, no objections, so that's how we'll proceed. That brings us on to point 6 on our agenda, the motion for a resolution on the 2012 progress report on the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Mr. Howard is the rapporteur. You have the floor. Amendments were, the deadline for the amendments was 6 p.m. on the 28th of January.
Thank you very much, President. I want to start by briefly reporting back on my visit to the country a little over a week ago as your rapporteur, given the context of the political crisis that is currently taking place with, as members will recall, events on the 24th of December which led to the clearing of some members of Parliament from their parliamentary chamber in Skopje, and which has led to a political disagreement between the main parties since, with blame being pushed from either side, and with the major opposition party, SDSM, leaving Parliament and threatening to boycott the local elections which are due to take place at the end of March. These are, of course, unwelcome events where both this committee and MEP colleagues, the Commissioner, the Member States have sought to be positive in our influence and have sought to make statements in a way to help the parties to resolve the differences between them, but where, as we sit today, nearing the end of February, that progress has not been found. I chose, having met with all of the political parties in private and at length, and I have to say had good and constructive meetings, I chose to make some more words public than I'd done before, and I have sent that to all of the shadows of the different political parties, but I want to just place on record in Parliament itself some of the main ones, how much I deeply regret the current political situation, how it does risk jeopardising future progress. I called on the parties and others in the country to recognise the real progress that we have made in Brussels, and I welcomed the fact that politicians in the country were talking to me about the good momentum that was taking place in relation to resolving the name issue, and I called for that momentum not to be lost because of the current crisis. I said, and it remains my opinion, that there is a historic opportunity at the European Council in June for there to be a positive decision, but if events in the country over the next days prevent progress being made towards such a decision, what that may lead to is a failure over some years for us to make progress, and that's how important I believe the current situation is. I did say that the perception of what happened on the 24th of December is that it questions fundamentally the democratic credibility of the country, but that the European Parliament does not believe in boycotts of elections in this or any other country. And I hope and believe that I have the support from the wide membership of this committee in this Parliament in making that statement. I called for there to be political will to overcome the dispute, but said that if that political will is demonstrated, I believe the dispute could be solved. I then went on to say, with a heavy heart, that it was my belief that unless the crisis is solved, then I was considering, and today, President Brok, I put forward formally my proposal that this Parliament postpones its vote, its committee vote at this committee, due in a couple of weeks' time on my report. And I do so without enthusiasm, but I do so because I believe it reflects the reality. I want to steer a report through this committee and this Parliament that makes a positive recommendation on the country and enables progress to be put forward. I believe, given the current situation in the country, that it is eminently possible that we would end up with a negative report in this committee and in this Parliament, and that's not something I want to see. And so I hope that the postponement of this report will send a very, very clear signal to the parties in Skopje that we do support the country, but we really want them to resolve the political crisis. And I want to say, President, and I want to thank the shadow rapporteurs, that I have had consultation with them both before going to Skopje, some of them, and from the current groups, EPP, ALDE, ECR, Greens, GUE, and of course the S&D group, and that all of them are supporting this postponement that I formally put to you today. I don't think any of them do so with enthusiasm, but we have a shared view, and I hope our unity in saying that will be heard in Skopje by all of the actors involved. Now, President, it still would be my intention to comment on the amendments this afternoon in brief and to listen to what other colleagues have got to say. It's still my intention, with the support of the Secretariat, to go ahead with negotiations on compromises tomorrow, because I want us to be ready to move forward if events in the country themselves move forward. I'll say there are a lot of amendments, so I'm not going to comment on all of them. I'll listen to what colleagues want to say in the debate and I'll reply to them as best as I possibly can. I do want to say the following, though. On Amendment 7 from the Greens, talking about the bilateral issue, clearly the name dispute being resolved before the end of the negotiations. The position the Commissioner has taken is in the early stages of the negotiation. I do feel that we should stick with the Commissioner on that, and I wonder if we could agree an oral amendment on that. To the very many 9 amendments from Mr Stoyanov about the Bulgarian position, I just appeal to him. 9 recitals out of 16 just on relations with Bulgaria. It's disproportionate, and the language used is clearly playing to a particular interest in Bulgaria and does not reflect a proportionate or constructive set of proposals. And so I say to the other Bulgarian members, many of whom have met with me and have come forward with amendments and have sought to represent your interests but to be constructive, I remain with the mainstream Bulgarian members ready to sit down and try and find compromises that meet your proper aspirations but which are not provocative and not destructive and which enable there to be a balanced resolution as a whole, and that remains my commitment to all of you. On paragraph 1, you recall last year I recommended that there's a very clear, short commitment on this Parliament's support for the accession negotiations starting, and that remains my hope. Many members now, because of the current political situation, have sought to amend that, and I think that makes the point about the need for postponement, though I will say that I have some sympathy with the members who have signed Amendment 26, and I believe it can be combined with my own Amendment 36. So I believe that amendment can be supported. In relation to the good neighbourly relations issue, again, there are many amendments in relation to that. I can see amendments including 29, 30, 32, 34 and 35 being involved in a compromise, and to Mrs Copper, 38, in terms of good neighbourly relations. She's got a different way of drafting it, but the meaning is fine. Similarly with 39 and 41. I suggest that we'll end up with a compromise covering all of those, but probably in two paragraphs to avoid it being over long. On paragraph 3 of my original text, the words game changer are not liked by several members, so I'll just reflect on that and see if I can find different words with the amendments put forward. In relation to the high-level accession dialogue, I do regret Amendment 50. I do think that there have been achievements and the Commission and the authorities in the country should be recognised for that. And in terms of having a balanced text. I would regret if 50 passes. On Green Amendment 53, I say to Ms Cornelissen that I have some sympathy with starting the screening process. I'm not sure the Commission legally are able to do that, so I think we need to reflect on that in terms of our disposition on that particular amendment. On the political crisis, many of us have put amendments including all the major groups, and there is a large amount of overlap, and clearly we need to discuss that, but we hope that events in the country might help us to find a different formulation. In relation to the visa-free regime, I strongly support amendments 69 and 79 together with my own original text, and I agree with the proposers that maintaining the visa-free regime is a very, very important signal in this country and in others in this region. On lustration, I do think that we need a text. I'm open to amendments, but what for me is very important is that there is political neutrality on the lustration issue, and that's the wording I most want to defend. Many people have put forward amendments on multi-ethnic education, which I think can be incorporated in amendments with my own original text. I think we're all pushing in the same direction on that issue. On the International Court of Justice judgment, I simply make this point. That was the previous year, and I'm not sure that the wording that's put forward is constructive at this point. But I do accept a number of the amendments on bilateral good neighbourly relations with Greece deserve to be studied closely, and on merit may lead to us agreeing a compromise amendment. So I want to make the same commitment to my Greek colleagues that I do to my Bulgarian colleagues, that we study and deal constructively with the suggestions that you've put forward. So I could go further, but I'll listen to the debate and respond to the colleagues that put forward their suggestions. But as we stand today, and I want to bring members up to the very latest, the opposition party had a congress over the course of the weekend. It's not changed its stance. It's currently threatening for its members of parliament to submit their resignations from parliament on the day of the local elections, so there seems to be no change in their stance at the moment. From the point of view of the governing party, I understand that an announcement has been made that the deadline for nominations to be made for the local elections to go ahead with all parties taking place to be extended until this Saturday to give more time. Of course, the opposition party had offered to come back into the elections, but on the basis of a deal on national elections that was unacceptable to the governing party. And as we speak, I don't see there to be immediately a prospect for them to find agreement on what they've said in public. I just hope they're meeting in private and that the political will emerges for them to find a compromise agreement. As far as the Commissioner is concerned, I'm sure the Commission will speak at the end of this debate, but I've worked closely with him and his services. I thank them for their cooperation. He's himself postponed a visit to Skopje, which had been planned in terms of the next round of the high-level accession dialogue, and I know has been in close communication with the party leaders himself, and he and I hope all of us, hope that we can see progress in dealing with this political crisis in the country in a way that can enable us to move forward. I'd hope to be making quite a different speech today and for us to be having quite a different debate. I deeply regret that we are where we are, but I hope the political parties, I hope people, I hope organisations, society in this country understand how grave and serious this crisis is, not just within the domestic politics of the country, but for the country as a whole. And I repeat what I said in Skopje, that it is time for the political parties to put the country's interest above their own party interests, and that's an appeal we make to all of the parties. We do not seek to ascribe blame. Commissioner Füle has come forward with this proposal for a commission of inquiry. I personally place on record my support for that. So we're not into, and I hope this Parliament and the political parties in this Parliament, I don't believe they will not simply take sides with their sister parties within our respective European families, but that we will ourselves show our commitment to this country and its future by ourselves remaining united, and that by doing so we will help unite parties currently in dispute within the country. Thank you very much.
Kukan.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. First of all, I would like to thank the rapporteur, Mr. Howitt, for his good work with this report and also for the presentation or introduction of today. Also, I would like to thank all the colleagues who are following the situation in Macedonia and who contributed to this report by their amendments. As we discussed in our previous meeting, I think that the draft report is balanced, and I agree with the rapporteur's assessment of the progress in the country when it comes to the EU integration. Yet, very big yet, the internal political situation in the country has been and still is raising concerns. These developments could have impact on the report. Political statement following the events of 24th of December is not any closer to the solution, and I'm afraid the political will to constructive dialogue has not been found so far. I'm concerned about these developments, and especially about opposition's boycott of the parliament and announced boycott of the upcoming local elections. It is clear that in such situation of fairly positive assessment of the integration process might be questioned. As a strong supporter of the international process of the country, I would like to appeal to all Macedonian politicians to intensify their work on finding solutions to these situations. Boycotts are not the way forward, especially as they might hamper achievement and progress the country has already accomplished. In this respect, I intend to agree with the rapporteur's proposal to postpone the vote on the report. However, I will have to make further consultation within my political group. Tomorrow afternoon, the meeting of rapporteur with shadow rapporteurs is planned, and I think that will be a good opportunity to reach the common approach or consensus on how we should deal and do the further process with this resolution. I think it is in our interest to reach the common agreement because we want the European Parliament to be the constructive, strong, positive player in the country under the current situation. I am not of the opinion that this situation reveals accomplishments Macedonia made over the last year in integration process, but as I said, it could hamper the future progress. I still hope that the politicians in Macedonia will act responsibly in the best interest of the country and citizens, but I'm afraid that hope is gradually fading away. Concerning the report and the amendments, I'll be very general, only several remarks because we have not seen the compromises so far. I want to mention that I agree to proceed according to the rapporteur's proposal concerning references to the country, namely using both the reference FYROM and adjective Macedonia once in the report. In case we are agreed to proceed with the report, my standpoint on the amendments is following. I will not support the amendments which could lead anyhow to worsening the internal political situation in the country. I am not keen to support amendments which are one-sided and can contribute to the tensions in the relations to Bulgaria or Greece. And finally, I think that despite the political stalemate we will need encouraging language when it comes to the European Union agenda and also to the agenda of overcoming problematic issues with its neighbours. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to Mr. Howitt for all his work and definitely also for the report that he sent us on his trip to Macedonia. That was very helpful and informative. I of course support the suggestions of the rapporteur for a postponement. I think there's good reasons to do so because whereas Greece has been up to now the one blockade to opening negotiations, Macedonian politicians stand a chance of themselves forming an obstacle too. The criteria for opening include a properly operating parliamentary democracy. It's a prerequisite for further steps. And if they endanger that, then they're forming a blockade themselves. So even if Greece would now suddenly and very wisely say, all right, start negotiations and we'll solve the name issue elsewhere, there would still be reasons to wait now until they have their own house in order. The rapporteur mentioned a couple of the amendments we put in. I'll address two. Amendment 7. It says that the name issue needs to be solved towards the end of the accession process, before accession. You mentioned an oral amendment, so I'd be interested to hear what it is. I won't reject it out of hand before seeing it, but it might also be just a genuine difference of opinion, because in my view, it must be solved before accession, but entirely separately from the process of accession, which should be only criteria-based and only that. There's to say that the name issue needs to be solved at the beginning of it, mixes it within the accession process, which we think should not happen. And the other one is 53. You mentioned that the screening process cannot start without Council approval. We recognise that, and therefore we've worded the amendments fairly carefully. We ask the Council to ask the Commission to start screening as soon as possible. Thereby Greece and the Council could show their commitment to reform in Macedonia, even if the go-ahead for opening of negotiations is still blocked by Greece on other grounds. We could look at that and make sure that it conforms to the treaties. Thank you.
Schultis.
Ευχαριστώ κύριε Πρόεδρε. Θέλω να ευχαριστήσω τον εισηγητή μας.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank the rapporteur for the up-to-date information he's given us regarding the situation in Fyrom. It's a source of great concern to see that it's proven impossible to emerge from the political crisis in that country. I was rapporteur in Albania myself, and I think similar arguments apply. In the instance of Albania, as long as there was a political crisis, no progress could be made, and that's why I can agree with the rapporteur on a postponement to the vote. But on the actual political crisis itself, 2 or 3 brief points. First of all, as long as this political crisis remains, and I hope a swift solution will be found to it, we're not in a position to address the issues of substance mentioned here, on which there may be differences of opinion. There are some disagreements that we haven't managed to overcome. Subsequently, we need to move away from the crisis as quickly as possible to resolve those substantial issues, but if that's to be done, then the parties involved, the political parties, must get organised to tackle the crisis. And then it would appear that this crisis is driven by a socio-economic crisis. And in relation to our report, may I say that the social and economic crisis is more acute than this report would seem to reflect. The youth unemployment rate is now close to 60%, and we would need to look into what might be done. If we don't have a clear picture of these social and economic problems, if we overlook them, we won't be able to solve the political crisis either. At this point, I would like to say a little something regarding the recurrent issues which always come up time and again when we discuss reports on the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Colleagues, it would be a mistake to look at the accession of this country as a process which Greece is seeking to impede. That would be a mistake. Look, my party is not in government. We're not part of the Greek authorities. I'm therefore not supporting the current Greek government's position, nor that of its predecessor in what I say. But you can't just solve all the problems by saying, oh, look, Greece is putting an obstacle in the course to accession, and once that goes, that all the problems will be solved. Now, of course, there may be differences of opinion, as applies to the rapporteur too, but there may be other factors involved. I don't believe we can launch the accession process and then find ourselves bumping up against these problems. The issue of the name has to be resolved in the context of the United Nations. There's no other way out. That is the context for a solution to that particular issue. If we address that matter in a different light, we will not be helping anyone. Whence my amendment. I don't believe that the rapporteur is addressing the issue in the right terms, suggesting that the words Macedonia and Macedonian are used by the United Nations. No. What the United Nations says is that those expressions are being used provisionally until such time as a solution is found to the problem of the name, and this within an established procedure. So we cannot preempt the outcome of that process, otherwise we'll just be compounding the existing problems. So those are the points I wanted to raise with you. And I'd be glad if I could re-emphasize the point that if we state that the issue of the name is a bilateral issue between Greece and the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, without addressing the issue of good neighbourly relations, which have to be governed by international relations, then we would not be adopting an appropriate constructive approach. So I would urge the rapporteur to revisit that element. Lastly, regarding the economic situation, our comments need to be borne in mind. I've tabled a proposal on that. I'll take no more time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, let me also convey my congratulations to the rapporteur, Richard Howard, who's produced this year again a very balanced mainstream report. Richard, should I say? I don't think Mr. Stoyanov's party has ever been described as mainstream before, actually. But anyway, just to say that I've submitted, along with colleagues, a number of amendments. Amendment 31 on the issue, which I think is an important principle regarding bilateral issues not standing in the way of progressing a country if it wishes to join the European Union and is doing all the right things in terms of reforms. Amendment 40 on the regatta principle, every country must be judged on its own merits in terms of the accession process. Amendment 107, which I think is dear to your heart as an issue now, which may well result in a postponement of the vote on your report, calling on the opposition to return to Parliament. I mean, Parliament is the only place that they can conduct their business legitimately and in public and be scrutinised by the governing party as well. And to boycott Parliament, really, and to resign from Parliament en masse, frankly, strikes me as completely nonsensical. Amendment 121 on judicial reforms as an ongoing process, and 123, 127, 129, which I did with Mrs. McAvey on the issue of fighting corruption and organised crime. Macedonia, I mean, I have to say, as the rapporteur for Montenegro, Montenegro wasn't even a candidate country and is now negotiating for membership, and Macedonia was already a candidate at that stage, whatever it was, 7 or 8 years ago. So it is extremely unfortunate and really sad that Macedonia is being held back because of the name question, and anything that we can do in my group or in the committee to try and move that agenda forwards, we would support. And let's hope that on this occasion, provided this crisis in the parliamentary democracy can be resolved vis-à-vis the opposition, that the Commission can come up with a positive recommendation again to the Council to start negotiations for Macedonia and its EU accession process. Thank you.
Ευχαριστώ κύριε Πρόεδρε. Βέβαια, αντίστοιχη συζήτηση έχουμε κάνει επανειλημμένως.
Thank you. We've had discussions of this kind before. In fact, we have them every year on FYROM. But the issue today is as follows. What is the real problem with this country? Is the real problem that Greece is blocking accession? No. The report describes the real problems. Shortcomings in the justice system, corruption, incomplete implementation of media freedom policies. And then there's a process underway, an international effort under the auspices of the United Nations to resolve the name issue. And the country itself is blocking that. Greece has made specific proposals and there hasn't even been a reaction. And that means, colleagues, that all of this is rather hypocritical. To say the country is doing swimmingly, they're ready to join the EU, and only Greece is blocking its way. And that's what's happening here with the postponement of the vote. The country has major problems. But unfortunately, it's politically immature. It's an immature democracy. The opposition doesn't go to Parliament. And the idea that the vote could be postponed and that by June we'll have a fine report with all the problems resolved. I'm sorry, I don't buy that. I think it's unrealistic. My recommendation to the committee is to vote as planned and to see reality, to look reality in the eye. Would it be sensible politically to try to mask the reality? The report has to reflect the reality on the ground. The reality on the ground as it is today. And the reality is what it is. And now I see that there is an effort between the lines to modify the reality. And I can see through that. So I'm sorry. I know there are people who want to buy time, people who hope the situation will improve, but the situation isn't going to improve very quickly in that country. And I think I think maybe the Commission should actually go there and see what's happening. Look at the confrontations on the ground. Look at the policies pursued by the people in power who are exacerbating conflict domestically and internationally. Bad neighbourly relations are being forged. And you can't have double standards. You can't have countries joining that haven't met the standards. Thank you.
Kirillov.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me also commend the rapporteur, Richard Howitt, for the difficult job he's performing, for the lot of problems and enormous energy he's devoting to this country. No doubt we're all interested in the accession process of a country, especially in such an important region as far as the Western Balkans are concerned, as far as because it bears stability for the future. Now, immediately regarding this proposal for postponement, I think the situation is volatile, so at least for this reason we should try to wait up a little bit and see. But let me tell you quite sincerely, there are certain things which were not noticed in the country for some time. Maybe it's this huge issue, the name issue, and even some people sympathetically look that things are okay. As some colleagues already pointed out, I have had serious concern about the democratic standards regarding relations with people who feel or describe themselves of different ethnic origin, nationalistic outbursts, even nationalistic megalomanic plans, what is being done in Skopje so far. But this was somehow put on in the backyard. Now, this surprise in December, and some colleagues are not discussing it as well, maybe some do not know the details, it's something quite important. I hope not just in Europe, but anywhere in the world, if police is ordered to come into parliament and throw out members of parliament of the opposition, let me add, following the same expulsion of journalists before so that they don't watch what is going on, then we should have a clear position on this. I didn't hear the Commission. Rapporteur did that, and I commend him for that, but the Commission did not. It's only Carl Bildt who made a statement following this event. Now, when we are critical regarding the opposition for not coming back to Parliament, I think this is correct. And I also appeal that we have a balanced attitude to the whole thing. But how about if you're thrown out of Parliament and then you ask the same party just to go back in the process? We should be even-handed in this, and we should say what we think about this event, throwing MPs by police in Parliament. And we could possibly explain to ourselves, would the police dare do that without a very high-level protection or order? So let's go a little bit deeper. If we want to be constructive, we have to do that, because otherwise things will linger. I don't think we'll achieve any results. We have to apply this pressure, and we have to say what we have to say regarding the democratic standards in this country, this particular government, which has been, in my opinion, not very democratically credible all the time, but we pretended not to notice that. Thank you.
Also zunächst einmal möchte ich sagen, dass wir uns mit einem Fortschrittsbericht.
Firstly, I would point out that we're dealing with a Commission progress report. A Commission progress report on a year 2011, during which Macedonia, I repeat Macedonia, made extraordinary progress. And that's what the progress report says. Without turning a blind eye to the problems. Now, in a year's time, we'll deal with the current issues, the current problems. Mr. Howitt, in my view, has done a splendid job in submitting to us a balanced text, and I share his view, and I support wholeheartedly his view that we here should not play out the conflict among ourselves that's being played out in the country. We should demonstrate to the Macedonian parties that we have a common line, and that common line is respecting the criteria, and we expect the Macedonian parties to cooperate on the path to EU accession. They should not, in irresponsible ways, play out their domestic conflicts at the expense of the EU accession process. They should not export their domestic conflicts to the European Union. There is a clear consensus between the forces in this European Parliament, and I think that Mr. Howitt has done a sterling job of expressing that in words. The idea of a postponement is perhaps a sensible one, and I'd like to support it. But I understand Mr. Howitt's grave reservations, and my own reservations have been heightened by the second part of this debate, because there is a danger that this sensible postponement could be misunderstood or even abused, and yet I would say clearly it must not be abused. It must not be abused, and it must not be misunderstood by those practicing boycotts in the country, those practicing provocations in the country. They should not be rewarded. They should not be encouraged to continue boycotting and provoking. The idea of a postponement is not to reward those who have created problems. The idea of a postponement is simply to foster consensus. And secondly, the idea of a postponement is not to give Council the idea of putting off accession negotiations even further. And Mrs. Giannakou is always talking about accession. We're not talking about accession, Mrs. Giannakou, but after 10 years of candidate status, it's high time, after 10 years, it's high time to begin the negotiations. That's what it's about. And postponing the report by a few weeks should not be abused by those who don't want accession negotiations to take place and who want to put them off indefinitely. And there's a third misunderstanding that must not arise, and that is the postponement of the report should not merely not be abused to put off the accession negotiations, but it should not be abused to maintain the dispute over the name. And I will tell you very clearly, there is no name issue. It's not a bilateral issue, it's not a European issue, it's not an international issue. Greece is the only country which recognizes a name issue. The name issue exists only in the heads of certain Greek politicians, and I think it's time to stop all of that. There has been agreement behind closed doors over the name. But we in Bavaria call ourselves Bavarians, and no one can stop us. And in the same way, no one can stop the Macedonians calling themselves Macedonians. So I would say to Mr. Howitt that yes to the postponement, but it must not be abused or misunderstood.
postpone the vote. Yeah. Our shadow Norika Nicolai is unfortunately not here today, but I want to convey her message. We want to congratulate you for your work, for your well-balanced report, and all the enthusiasm and positive energy that you have invested in Macedonia, in relation between European Parliament and Macedonia, and to create much better atmosphere. On the other hand, I want to say that high-level political dialogue cannot supplement the accession process. This is what we are looking for. But unfortunately, recent developments create a new situation. Your report, very positive one, and everybody wants to support you, is becoming more virtual because the reality is something completely else, different, negative. And the gap between reality and your report is widening every day, it seems so. That's why we believe that the postponement is a good compromise. And of course there will always be a battle for the reinterpretation, why was something postponed. But there are more other things that I want to mention. Stefano Salino was there who knows how many times. And the Commissioner was trying to achieve preconditions to spread a positive message. At the end of the day, he was forced to postpone his visit because there were no preconditions. And the situation is going deeper and deeper. Macedonia is sinking in a political turmoil. And I want to use this opportunity to call political elites in Macedonia to see themselves in a mirror, a realistic mirror, and stop blaming each other. They need to find a solution. Because I want to mention something else from the Western Balkans. Prime Minister of Serbia and Prime Minister of Kosovo are coming together on every occasion. They were together 5 times. On 4th of March, they will be here in Brussels for the 6th time. This is a high-level dialogue with a lot of results and the implementation of the agreement. But they don't communicate among themselves. So I think that it's a moment of truth when we need to send a very clear message. Now I will switch to my language because I want to say something about national identity and I want to speak in Slavonic language.
As you all know, I come from Slovenia. I speak Slovenian language and I belong to the family of Slavic nations. And this used to be the case in the Western Balkans not long ago. There you have 2 Slavic nations, Bulgarian and Macedonians. They all praise the same saints, they have the same poets, writers. They go to the same monasteries. And now we hear that the Macedonians are not Slavs any longer. They speak a Slavic language. They're using the Cyrillic script. They're using the same grammar. And yet, they're not Slavs anymore. How about Bulgarians then? The political elite in Macedonia should be aware that they are causing collateral damage and they are making their relationships with the neighbors toxic. If other Western Balkans nations of Slavic origin started to rewrite their history in this way, then we would end up with the entire Europe being Balkanized in the worst possible sense of the word. This is why I think this is the right moment to call upon the governing parties and the opposition to come back from prehistoric times and to return to today and enable us in the European Parliament to adopt the report for 2012 as drafted. But in order for this to be possible, they have to make a step forward both the coalition and the opposition, and only in this case will we be able to support our rapporteur and also help the European Commission and the Council to take into account the recommendation and issue a date for Macedonia. I know that my words would hurt in Macedonia, and I know that this will be an enormous challenge for the rapporteur sitting in this room. This will also be a big challenge for those who have to decide whether to publish this or not. But only Macedonia can help itself, Bulgaria and other countries, and get a positive assessment and a date. Thank you very much, and congratulations to the rapporteur.
Thank you very much for your intervention. Now I give the floor to Mr. George Koumoutsakos.
Thank you, Chair. The political situation in Skopje is highly problematic. Institutions barely work. Democratic standards are daily violated. And as a whole, democracy is almost moribund. Despite the situation, you, Chair, in your intervention, said that despite this fact, we should not deceive and we should not discourage them to continue. And we are in front of a situation a little bit awkward. When things are rather smooth in Fyrom, you say and we say that we should send positive signals, we should encourage them to continue. When things are getting from bad to worse, we say that, once again, we should not deceive them. So we have to make up our mind. Either when things are going well, we encourage, and when things do not go well, we discourage. We criticize heavily, in a meaningful way. So we cannot have always positive signals, whatever happens in this country. And then I go to another comment. Once again, Greece was targeted by some colleagues. And I want to ask them, who took the floor in the recent European Council to take the position that we should not yet start negotiations? It was only Greece? No. It was another neighboring country, Bulgaria. I would say some other member countries as well were a little bit reluctant, but it was Greece and Bulgaria. And you know the problems that Albania has with the situation, internal situation in Fyrom. What does it mean? That three neighbors, Greece, Bulgaria, and Albania, have serious problem with this country. And in this house, in this democratic house, we point with our fingers to two partners, Bulgaria and Greece, plus Albania. These are the fools of the neighborhood. And the only wise man is Mr. Gruevski. I mean, it sounds a little bit awkward to me. Then, my final point. When, Mr. Kukan, you called upon the Macedonian politicians to do this or that, have you ever thought that you are risking to get letters from the tens of my fellow members of the Greek parliament representing Macedonia in the Greek parliament? Probably you will get some hundreds, but surely tens, because almost 30 or 40 members of the national Greek parliament are representing Macedonia in our parliament. And I'm saying this because this has to do with the use of the adjective Macedonian in the text. So, colleagues, the situation is rather complicated, is rather difficult. Our strategic aim is to have this country in the European Union, provided that all problems are solved. This is what I wanted to say, just to add something on the very wise words already expressed by Marietta Giannakou. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Plenković.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kukan. First of all, a very positive remark on the work of the rapporteur, Mr. Howitt, whom I met also in Skopje, actually, in my different capacity a year and a half ago at a conference, so I know how consistent he is in trying to bring Macedonia closer to the European Union. My statement today relates with a similar experience that Croatia has had in the last 15 years, just as much as Macedonia did. On the 24th of November 2000, in Zagreb summit, Macedonia initialed the SAA agreement. For us, it was the moment of starting to evade the power of euphemisms in terms of European perspectives for the countries in the region. And today, Croatia finds itself 4 months before accession. However, the scenario for our Macedonian friends was not even remotely similar, and the fact that they have been in the position of a candidate country since 2005 and with an open calls of Commission to start negotiations since 2009 is certainly a scenario which leaves a lot of frustration. Therefore, we should not all be surprised with certain delays in some reforms. Even when you look at the fact that the Commission and Macedonia had to start the high-level accession dialogue, what is this instrument for? It's a substitute for proper institutional relationship in the context of the accession negotiations. And therefore, this report, which in our view very well covers the Commission findings from October last year, opens the way forward. We believe that the opposition should go back to the Parliament, that boycotting the Parliament is not at all a way to solve the problems. And from a principal point of view, with all the respect that I have to our Greek colleagues, we from Croatia have felt so strongly that the Europeanization of bilateral issues is the wrong way. It's not the encouraging way for the functioning of the European Union as a whole, and it is something that hampers the enlargement process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Pack.
Ja, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
Well, dear colleagues, Ms. Howard, I would like to congratulate you on your report. Mr. Howard, I think it was a very good one, and I think we also have to bear in mind. Speaker breaks off.
Okay.
Oh, it's just Greece reversing there. We need to bear in mind that this progress report is, of course, based on the Commission's 2012 progress report, but we cannot ignore what's happened between autumn of 2012 and now. We need to stare the facts in the face, as we're doing with Bosnia. So to say this is just to do with 2011, I think is not doing the facts justice. Now, the name question is not an international question, as Mrs. Giannakou has said. It's a bilateral question, as another colleague has said. Now, you can choose to understand that or not, as you wish, but it's a bilateral question. Neither Mrs. Pack nor Mr. Howitt or others are bothered about the fact that the country chooses to call itself Macedonia. The colleague who said that Mr. Kukan is getting nasty letters from about Macedonia from Greece. Well, the Macedonians who are sitting in the Greek parliament, I imagine that they are Greek citizens. The Bavarians who sit in the German Bundestag, well, they are Bavarians and they're also Germans. So I assumed that those Macedonians were elected to the Greek parliament as Greeks, not as Macedonians. So there's a point there I don't quite get. So I don't assume that that really is a problem. I imagine it's being made into one, and it's something that we should not accept. Second point, the Bulgarian colleague is no longer present in the room, but the local elections which he says are being boycotted, well, I've been asked about that too, and I have my experience of boycotts in the Balkans with Albania. You had various parties choosing to boycott parliaments or elections. You know, there's an amazing variety of possibilities for boycotts in the Balkans. But I have to say that whoever is boycotting, it's really quite a stupid measure to take, because you're leaving the playing field open for the other political forces. And I'm convinced that the opposition in Macedonia and the governing parties want to accede to the European Union. So I think that we're quite right when we encourage them to engage in the democratic process and to field candidates. Now, what I hope is that this will be possible. Now, secondly, there are major problems in Macedonia, and they have become more serious. I remember that when in 2005 Macedonia became a candidate, they had earned that status, otherwise they would not have been awarded it. Now, those who are saying we need to start negotiations now, well, that is absurd, because the only thing holding things back is the name question. There are many more problems in the country now than there were in 2005, and the reason for that is that because of this constant lack of certainty as to what's going to happen in the future in the country, nationalism has increased, as it has in the neighbouring country as well. And I don't think necessarily one should be praising the country's government for beating the drum of nationalism and putting through and through Macedonians in all positions of power. People are saying, well, that is provoking the neighbour, but you know, the neighbour's being quite provocative as well. It's a vicious circle, really, isn't it? And so I think the only way to break that circle is to give the country a real prospect of accession, because before they will be able to accede, there'll be a great deal of water that will flow under all of the bridges of the Balkans. But we need to give the country the chance to accede, because if they do have that chance, that prospect, they will start working on the acquis communautaire, and they will forget this stupidity of the name dispute. I think, you know, we have to use a bit of common sense there. And are there still some colleagues here from Greece? One or two. Well, what should these people call themselves? You know, they didn't just suddenly fall down from the heavens, did they? They're Macedonians. You know, whether they're quite, you know, they're Macedonians in the same way as they're Macedonians in Greece or in other, people who live in the other parts of the old Macedonian empire. You know, we can't carry on calling them former Yugoslavians. The people have the right to use their name. And why can't they at least use the adjective Macedonian? Now, I'm not proposing a particular name myself, and I know that there's a name in the pipeline and has been for a long time. But I think you need to allow them at least to use the adjective Macedonian. You cannot rob someone of their identity. Nobody is thinking about robbing the Greek Macedonians of their identity either. So I think there needs to be a bit of common sense shown on both sides. And if that were the case, we would have been able to get rid of this problem years ago, and Macedonia wouldn't be in the rather difficult situation that it currently is in, because the inter-ethnic problems which are arising in the country are partly to do with the fact that this name question has not been solved. One group, of course, couldn't care less about the name problem, but the other is very much attached to the name. So I think it's absolutely astounding that it's only the Greeks and the Bulgarians are so concerned about the name issue. There must be something further behind this, some sort of hidden agenda which it's nothing to do with me, and let's be honest and call a spade about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Ms. Ibrisagic and the chair back to the chairman.
There was a direct question to me. So I have to answer.
You will get the floor when it comes to you.
Thank you.
You are on the list of speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I understand that you still don't remember my name. You're not listening to me. Yes, it was better than for 2 days ago. I give you a couple more years. Thank you. Yeah, it's easier. Hur som helst.
Anyway, it's not all that easy to follow Doris. She gave a very good description of the situation, I think, and I agree 100% with what Doris Pack said, and also what Mr. Posselt said earlier on as well. Just a couple of small comments, nevertheless. I think most colleagues who are against the idea of us postponing the resolution, well, those colleagues come from Bulgaria or Greece in the main, and most Greek colleagues have said that it's not Greece's fault that Macedonia hasn't become a member of the European Union. Well, dear colleagues, nobody is saying here that Macedonia automatically would become a member of the EU if Greece hadn't stopped them. But Macedonia would have perhaps been able to start the negotiations if Greece hadn't stopped them. That's an enormous difference. Now, the difference between starting negotiations and becoming a member of the EU is decades of negotiations. The country that I represent, Sweden negotiated during more than 5 years, in fact, to become a member of the EU. And you can perhaps compare the economic, democratic and political background between Sweden, 200 years without a war. Compare that with the situation in the Balkans. And even for a country such as Sweden, we needed at least 5 years of negotiation. So you can imagine just how long it would take for Macedonia to finish its negotiations. Now, it's quite true that Macedonia, just like all of the other countries in the Balkans, needs to do a great deal. But the best way to carry out those reforms is to start negotiations. That was exactly the argument that we used when we wanted Croatia and Montenegro to open up negotiations as quickly as possible. It was exactly the same argument that we also used when we said that Serbia and Macedonia as well need a date to start to open up negotiations, because as soon as they did open up negotiations, that's when we had the best leverage to help them actually get reforms going in the best way. So all of the things we're criticizing today, all of these could be improved. Now, moving on and addressing Greek colleagues again. Georgios, you say that today it's not just Greece, but also Bulgaria, which has a problem with Macedonia. Well, I agree with Doris. Back in 2005, so many years ago, when we gave Macedonia candidate status, well, back then it was only Greece that objected, and we warned. We said that if we don't carry on with the reform process for every country in the Balkans, this isn't a unique situation for Macedonia, but if we don't proceed with reforms, political tensions will rise, nationalism will rise, and we'll start seeing worse problems in the Balkan. And we've sounded that warning in other countries' case as well. And that's why we have wanted Serbia to start negotiations as well, because it's the only way to tackle nationalism. We warned that this would happen. And the fact that it's not just Greece these days that has a problem with Macedonia, but Bulgaria as well, well, that's nothing new for me. That's what we were warning about many years ago when Greece vetoed Macedonia's entrance into NATO and also the EU. Now, if we carry on waiting, well, it's not just going to be Bulgaria and Greece that are against Macedonia. It's going to be more and more countries as well, because nationalism is going to increase. Frustration is going to increase, and we're not going to see the reforms taking place that we really want to see take place. So, dear friends, similar to all the all of the other countries in the Balkans, if we want to see change, if we want to see stability, if we want to see democracy win the day, then what we need is to move on to the next stage. We need each country to move forward and make positive progress towards accession. Macedonia is waiting so impatiently and has been doing so for so many years, and the worst thing we could do would be to force them to carry on waiting. Therefore, we should allow them to make progress as soon as we can. I congratulate Mr. Howitt for the excellent text and for his goodwill to try and find the best possible compromises that everybody can live with and can push the country forward. And I support your proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I understand that this committee will review the situation, the political developments over the coming weeks, but I would just like to say that to a large extent the assessments in the draft report very much reflect the assessments in the Commission's progress report from last year, as do many of the amendments that I've heard today. Now, when we issued the progress report in October last year, the conclusions that we issued alongside the progress report, we said quite clearly that the high-level accession dialogue has served as an important catalyst for reforms. We also highlighted a number of challenges and shortcomings in our progress report, but it's our very strong view that the best way to address these challenges is in the context of negotiations. And that's why we also stated at the time of our progress report that moving the accession process to the next stage is necessary to consolidate peace and pay the pace and sustainability of reforms and mitigating risk of reversal of the process. Now, of course, we cannot ignore what has happened between when the report was published and now, and we are concerned at the situation, and we are frustrated at the fact that there has not been progress in overcoming the current political crisis, which is dragging on too long. The Commission, along with its international partners, including the US, have issued a number of statements over the previous weeks, calling on both parties to reach a solution based on the national interests of the country, and also calling on the respect for the institution of the Parliament and its democratic values on which it is founded. The Commission, as Mr. Howitt said, also supported President Ivanov's initiative, our proposal for a committee of inquiry. We think this is an important initiative to address the events of the 24th of December and issue recommendations so as to avoid a recurrence of such events in the future, along with a package of other initiatives which have been discussed by the parties. Now, Commissioner Füle is in regular contact with the parties, and as you know, he visited Skopje in January, and as some members have mentioned, Director General Sanino has been there as well. He did postpone his visit last week. This visit was scheduled to discuss the high-level accession dialogue, and we felt that the timing was not appropriate given the political situation, and we wanted to give more time for the leaders to redouble their efforts to seek a solution to the crisis. Now, this doesn't mean that the work on the high-level accession dialogue has stopped. We're continuing work. There's a number of technical meetings which are ongoing, and preparatory work continues. This is obviously all the more, the current political crisis makes it all the more frustrating, given that there are elements on which we would like to report in spring, and a number of developments. Now, at this stage, we will continue our preparatory work, and like you, we will have to review the situation in the coming days and weeks. Thank you.
I have to bring you the congratulation of Yannis Kazalidis, who was just on the phone. He became the foreign minister, and he wants to say all hello to you. And he will come for the first Foreign Ministers' Council and wants to come here too to say farewell. And I think it's a good thing that someone like him with his responsibility takes over the job as foreign minister of his country in a very, very difficult situation. Ich möchte noch eine kurze Bemerkung machen.
If I can just make a brief comment before Mr. Howitt takes the floor. I'd be very interested, Mr. Howitt, in this boycott issue. I don't think boycotting a parliament is the right way to express one's political view. I think it is damaging to one's country. We need to see that this year the same thing has been tried in Albania. What we're seeing is party politicking, electioneering, and the idea is for the opposition to be criticized as much as the government. The question is it a political issue? Is it an ethnic issue? I'd be interested in whether this boycott is activation of the ethnic divisions in Macedonia, especially if the parties involved are Macedonian or Albanian. The name issue bores me intensely. Whether it's coming from the Greek side or the other side. If you want your neighbour to agree, then you don't necessarily need to name the road to your neighbouring country the Alexander the Great Highway if you think that's going to rub your neighbour up the wrong way. And Mrs. Pack mentioned the statues, which are even worse. And I think it's a very delicate thing to start messing around with, trying to create an identity that wasn't there before. But this really isn't an international issue, as people have said. It's a bilateral issue with the mediation of the United Nations, but the UN is mediating in a bilateral dispute. The question is, though, shouldn't the EU do more in terms of pressure and leverage? I'm afraid I don't know the details well enough to know whether to make such a recommendation, but I don't think things can carry on as they are. And maybe both countries should be put under greater pressure. They shouldn't be left entirely to the United Nations. The Council of Ministers, the European Commission can bring more pressure to bear on both countries. Because I've never really understood how somebody could put their own country's future and the European Union's future in jeopardy over something like this. I think it hasn't been handled at all intelligently. And quite obviously, patience is running out. I'm not convinced that it's good for people to have a name imposed on them. Since we've always called this Macedonia, it seems misguided to want to invent a name that's as long as possible. I think there are those who thought that the longer they can drag this out, the more likely they are to win. But now I'd like to hand over to the rapporteur for his last comments.
Well, first I'd like to say there are some days when I feel very proud to be a member of the European Parliament. I apologise.
Thank you, Chair. It was not my intention to ask for the floor, but
It's not Kundis. This was an immediate question to him.
Yes.
We do not open the Greek debate now.
No, in my answer I won't. And I will try to be brief, giving answers to all the questions addressed directly to me. First of all, Mr. Chairman and colleagues, I want to reiterate something that at least I have said many times before in this room. The strategic objective of Greece is to have all the neighbours in the family. Okay? That should be clear to everybody. We don't want, it's not to our profit, we don't want a black hole in the map of the European Union in the Balkans. So we don't want to exclude anybody, particularly this country, our neighbour, from the European Union. But there are problems. On the question raised by my colleague Doris Pack, what should the people should be called? Probably she heard what our colleague Kassin said. If she wants an answer, I can give her an answer. And the answer is Slav Macedonians. This can be very easily accepted and historically and factually correct. What about the... you should have the same reaction when Council was speaking. What about this sensitivity of having a country waiting 10 years to start negotiations? Sorry, but some countries should have the same sensitivity for Turkey that has been waiting for 40 years. And we know that the objections come from big countries of the European Union, particularly related to the free movement of people. Third answer, the status of candidate country. You needed unanimity to have this status. And Greece gave his positive vote so that our neighbour gets the candidate country status, hoping at that time that this goodwill, this movement of goodwill, this could probably change a little bit the attitude of our neighbours to be more productive in the negotiations. On the contrary, we had more rigid positions from their side. So one can question himself, why should change always our position? Final point. The character of the issue. Colleagues, when there is a UN Security Council resolution on an issue, how you call this issue? International or bilateral? There are a series of resolutions by United Nations Security Council. I mean, to my knowledge of international life and international law, this is par excellence what you call an international issue. And final point, I didn't get an answer, whether 3 countries in the neighbour are full, Greece, Albania and Bulgaria, and the only wise person in the neighbourhood is Mr. Gruevski. On this, I didn't have an answer. Thank you.
Ich möchte aber an einem Punkt eine Berichtigung einführen, die Verhandlungen mit Türkei.
The negotiations with Turkey have been going on since 2005, if I can just correct that point. Now, Mr. Howitt has the floor.
I think it's perhaps a shame that the debate ended on that note, but I won't change what I wish to say, which is that there are...
As I said, I will not open the debate on the Greek issue again. I've said, because it was a personal question to your Greek colleague, he had got the floor, and now it's Mr. Howitt, then the debate is...
Μα εκεί ακριβώς είναι και η ένστασή μου, κύριε Πρόεδρε. Εκεί ακριβώς είναι και...
That's exactly what I'm concerned with. Mrs. Pack asked if there were any Greeks in the room. There was Mr. Koumoutsakos, but I'm here too.
Προέκυψε στη συνέχεια το θέμα, κύριε Πρόεδρε. Προέκυψε στο θέμα. Διαμαρτύρομαι, διότι όταν λέει υπάρχει κάποιος Έλληνας...
I'm sorry, I must protest. I am here as a Greek. Mrs. Pack asked if there were any Greeks here.
Thank you very much, President. As I say, I regret that perhaps the debate ended on that note, but it has been a debate that's gone on over an hour and a half. And as I wanted to say, there are some days when I'm very proud to be a member of the European Parliament, and this is one of them. Because what everyone listening and watching to this debate has seen has been an incredible level of unity and common agreement amongst the vast number of people across the political spectrum in this committee, something that I hoped for and expected, but I think has been very amply demonstrated. And I congratulate all the colleagues that spoke in that spirit. Bernd Posselt, Yevgeny Kirillov, we know have very strong views and experiences, but they both made very balanced and responsible contributions, and I think I congratulate them and everyone. Mr. Kukan, you're indeed an excellent partner to work with on this country. I agreed with every word that you said, and I thank you for the very close working relationships you and I have, but also with all of the shadows. And Mr. Kacin has had to leave, but I spoke with Mrs. Nicolai in Romania today, and we have very, very strong communications. And I hope and believe that our unity in this debate, the strength of our argument and the strength of the numbers of people putting that argument will indeed send a signal to the parties in the country and a signal to the people of the country about where we stand as a European Parliament. And President Brok, I read carefully your comments earlier this month. I hear your frustration expressed today, as you expressed, by the way, in the plenary debate, and I listened very carefully when you contributed to the plenary debate when my report was dealt with last year. I think the frustration you express, I share. I'm grateful that you express it as the President of our committee. I think that sends a signal itself. I think I would say to you that I don't believe this boycott is an ethnic issue. It's a dispute essentially between the two ethnic Macedonian parties, but that doesn't make it any less serious. I just want to thank you for the personal attention that you give, because I think that really helps me as your rapporteur and helps this Parliament put our position. I think when you say, as Doris Pack said, that we want to put pressure on in this situation, I think you're absolutely right, and my suggestion, which has been accepted for postponement, is a way of putting pressure on. For Mrs. Giannakou, who's left us now, it's not buying time, right? No one wants delay. We don't want delay. I don't want delay. It's not buying time. It's an attempt to be active, to put pressure on, to actually try to actually make progress. But what I say to you, President, and through you to all of colleagues, I think we can put pressure on our own member states too. I think the member states in the Council could themselves show more political will. And I hope in your country, as well as mine and some others, that that message can be heard as well, because I think we have our own promises to keep as European Union member states. And I hope the Council will listen more carefully to where this Parliament has stand, and I hope will stand when we come to the future. Now, briefly, in terms of some individual points, Mr. Tannock helps me. Perhaps I wasn't quite clear enough. Mr. Stoyanov's amendments I regard as outside the mainstream. So if I didn't say that quite rightly, in the instance, he helps me to put that on the record correctly. What he and Mr. Posselt said, and I just want to acknowledge this has already been part of my discussion with Mr. Kukan, is that in coming to this decision to postpone, we don't want that decision to be misinterpreted. And so what both Mr. Kukan's group and my own group have started to talk about is having some sort of joint statement, not something from the committee to be voted. It would be co-signed by the rapporteur and shadow rapporteurs alone. but that is something that I fully agree with. And can I just appeal to all the representatives of the political groups who are listening to this debate, between now and 4 o'clock tomorrow, when we come together, let's try and get an agreement on a statement. I believe that we can do so, and then that will avoid any intent to misinterpret our intentions. And it must not be one-sided. You know, I've taken the step to come out against the boycott, knowing that that can be used, if selectively quoted, to say that only one party is at fault in this crisis. And so I just hope that everyone reporting this debate understands that the responsibility to resolve this crisis is on all parties. We don't agree with the boycott, but the responsibility is on all parties to see it's resolved. To Mr. Koumoutsakis and some others, all I'll say is sometimes in this Parliament I don't hear contributions that are what I hear when I'm in the country or in the neighbouring countries myself. I'm not saying it's going to be easy to make further progress on resolving the name issue, but incredible progress has been made. If you look at the exchanges that have taken place, and similarly with the Bulgarian Prime Minister in Skopje, things that are happening that perhaps wouldn't have happened some time ago, and I think it's our job to encourage that, not to discourage it, and I just say that to all the colleagues in the committee. I really thank Mr Brankovic for his contribution. I thought it was thoughtful, and I thought it sent a very good message to the rest of us, and I really I thank him. I think it is fair to just put on record that the high-level accession dialogue isn't a substitute to the accession negotiations, although I know he might feel that, but I would prefer to describe it as a key to unlock the process by which those accession talks can start. I say to Ms Ibrisagic, I don't know if you have pronounced your name better than Mr Brok or not. Perfect. It's the one area where I can claim to be more skilled than our famed president. But she's right. Her analysis was excellent, and people should listen to it. We are fighting ultranationalism in this region and in Europe. And what's happening in relation to the country for which I'm rapporteur is that as delay goes on, ultranationalism risks rearing its ugly head. And she is right in her analysis, and I thank her for making it. I close, President, by saying this, though. Again, something I said in the country a week ago. I hope and believe this debate sends a very positive signal that we are absolutely for the country and for the country's future European destiny. But we cannot be more for the accession of this country into the European Union than the people and the parties of the country are for themselves. And that's the challenge for them at this crucial and historic moment. And it's the challenge that we lay down to them today. Thank you.
Wir haben, glaube ich, eine Übereinstimmung dabei, dass
I think we have agreed to postpone the vote. But just till the following meeting. I don't think that boycotts should lead us not to vote on a report that concerns a report on 2011. So we're postponing the vote by one meeting of this committee. Is that accepted by everybody? Thank you. And then Mr. Chountis would like to make a personal statement.
Bitte sehr.
Κύριε Πρόεδρε, εκ του γεγονότος ότι στην προηγούμενη διαδικασία...
Chairman, just now you denied me the possibility to spell out the following two or three points. In these circumstances, I will ask you to remove the EUL-NGL group's support for the postponement of the vote. I may not have that much influence, but we will withdraw EUL's support for that postponement.
Dann hat die GUE-Gruppe dieses nicht.
Fine. The GUE group doesn't support what we've just decided.
Wir kommen damit zum Tagesordnungspunkt.
That brings us to agenda item 7, women's rights in the Balkan accession countries.
Unsere Berichterstatterin